back to our 18th episode of the Launch Your Farm Show, where I interview Jacqueline Pennington with Remax in Northumberland County. Today, Jacqueline and I discuss how she went from being a young and unknown agent who was often mistaken as a high school student to consistently putting out her message and building her brand to becoming one of the top agents in her area. Jacqueline shares why she decided to shift her focus to the untapped rural market, and she's been able to grow her business and has had incredible success with her traditional postcard marketing, backed by community events and online marketing. In this episode, Jacqueline and I talk about why it's worthwhile to get out and do a listing appointment, even if you don't get the listing. Jacqueline shares how finding her micro market and staying consistent with it really started to pay off and has helped her increase her profits. We also talk about what type of postcards work extremely well to reach your audience and how you can organize yourself to stay consistent with it. Jacqueline shares a super easy way to change your marketing to match the community you're serving so you can ensure you connect with your audience effectively. And Jacqueline shares how to find an underserved area and crush it with your farming efforts. Plus, we talk about a ton of other insights and ideas that you can use to grow your farm. So be sure to check out this episode, like and subscribe, and enjoy the episode with Jacqueline. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Launch Your Farm Show. I'm your host, Ryan Smith, and today we've got a great guest. It's Jacqueline Pennington from Remax Hallmark in Northumberland County. So Jacqueline, why don't you take a second, tell us a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about your business.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in real estate for just about 13 years now. I work in a small marketplace called Northumberland, which is most notably known for being about an hour east of Toronto. And in terms of, I did a lot of my business and I got a lot of my start from old school farming.
So what got you into real estate? How did that kind of transpire? And we'll talk about the farming as we go too.
Yeah. So I think probably like a lot of people, I literally bought my first house with a realtor and kind of added up the commission that the realtor made and said, hey, I figure I can give this a shot. I think that's unfortunately how a lot of us get into it. But for me, I think what was a little bit different is that I actually worked in an industry that was revolved around human rights and child advocacy prior to real estate. So I'd say when I came into the business, I had a very different mindset than I would say most people in the industry probably have.
Okay. So for you, when you jump right in, did you get into farming right out of the gate, or was it something that you kind of worked your way into? And what did that look like for you at the beginning?
So for me, I worked my way into it. The downside of farming, as you know, as someone who's been very involved in it, is that it does come with a fairly large expense associated with it. I was 23 when I started, so obviously I didn't have very deep pockets, and I started on my own, so I wasn't on a team. So in terms of farming, I would say that I got more actively into it probably when I was about 2 to 3 years in the business, and very much kind of through a trial and error. In hindsight, I wish I had, watched something like this or done a little bit more research, but I literally just kind of went out there and said, hey, let's give this a shot, and just kind of learned as I went.
I always ask people when they get into farming at the beginning, did you know what farming was, or was it just something you did? Because some people don't know it actually is called farming and they just kind of do stuff. Was it an intentional approach at farming, or was it just something you just kind of worked your way into?
I would say it was intentional to some extent, in terms of it didn't start out that way. So I started out with a very basic, I would sell a house in an area, and then I would send out a just sold postcard for that neighborhood after I sold the house. I did try old fashioned door knocking. It really wasn't something that worked well for me. And then essentially how it happened is that I was doing these solds after every time I sold a listing, seeing what kind of retention I was getting, what kind of call rate, and thought, well, this is actually working if I can spend a few $100s and generate another commission out of that sale. So that's really what I started to focus on. And then I just built it from there.
Awesome. So in that beginning stages, what did it look like for you when you were actually starting to take that farming approach? What was the strategies you were doing that kind of got you rolling?
Yeah, well, again, I was probably 24 at the time, so I can't honestly say I had this strategy with it. But it was really basically, I think I would just usually take essentially the postal code, the walking route for the neighborhood. So if I sold a house, on Main Street, in terms of, I would farm in terms of send out postcards to that specific area. I know a lot of people do that through door knocking as well. In terms of, and again, it was a bit of a learning curve, is that I really paid attention. And I think the one thing that I did that I would recommend for everyone is that I tracked everything. So every time I got a phone call, a sale, on any of those cards, I tracked it all. So then that way I could look back at the end of the year and really study what worked and what didn't work. And what I learned really quickly is that for me, the, complimentary free CMA cards, the generic ones that we all send out, didn't work as well as when I had an actual sale that I could share about. And then again, at that time, way back when, our average market time was 60 to 90 days, if you could
Wow.
believe it. So if I sold something, I know, crazy. And I have some of my original postcards where I would post, sold in 7 days. And that was a big deal then. And I noticed that anytime I had a sale where it had sold quickly, that was where I would get a lot of, in terms of a significant call rate on those.
So it was a hotter property, hotter type of property, or was it the price point you think that was driving that?
I like to think it was me, not just kidding.
Or both.
No, in terms of, I think it was a bit of both, but again, in terms of just, and again, back then it was essentially a numbers game. So if I sold a dozen houses, I would luck out and maybe one or two of those would sell in a short period of time. So I would really focus on when I had one of those listings that was essentially a really good, sale, so to speak, in the sense that I'd sold it quickly. I would then really pump up the marketing that I did around that.
Okay. So I know I find a lot of people get hung up on what do they actually send out when it comes to postcards or any type of marketing around a listing. What does that look like for you? And are you just listed, just sold, or like, is there any other information that you're offering, or what does it look like when you were back then? And then I want to move into like what you're doing now as well. So back then,
it was predominantly just sold cards. So in terms of, very basic in the sense, I made them, myself online and ordered them online through, I think at the time I used ePrint Canada or something like that, they were called. So they were really basic, to be honest. They weren't really that eye-catching either. And to be honest, fairly cheaply done. I didn't really spruce them up or, have them professionally done. And it was very basic. Picture of the house, just sold. If it sold in a short period of time, what it was. And then typically speaking, what I have consistently always done in the back is I list the marketing services. So that's always been a bit of my push and my catch in the market, is that I got into social media, online video marketing very early on. So the back of it is bullet points, in terms of what the highlight of my marketing is.
Awesome. So for you, when you were doing that, being the age you were, for some people, some agents get hung up thinking I'm not experienced enough. I don't know enough to who's going to want to work with me. Did you have any pushback from anyone else, or or yourself with your age and trying to do these marketing in these areas? What was it like for you?
Yeah, no, I certainly got a lot of pushback. And I think in terms of, again, being as young as I was, and I certainly didn't look very old. So I regularly showed up to listings and had people ask me if I just graduated high school. And I think the thing with farming is that it takes a long time to establish yourself, especially when you're new in the industry. And I think that can be said for anything. So in terms of when I would go in for CMA, I always say that I went in as the underdog. So it was usually a situation in which they were probably going to list with one of the top realtors. They were calling them in, and then essentially they get this postcard in their mail and they're like, well, let's just call in a third opinion, see what this kid says. And I knew a lot of the time when I walked in there and I sat down, I knew that they weren't listing with me, from the get-go. I was never the person they were calling to list. I was often being called in as just, hey, let's just get a second opinion or just see what they have to say. So I lost the vast majority of them that I did. In terms of if I did, 10 CMAs, I might get one if I was lucky. Because again, I was going up against some pretty high producing agents. But I always really had that mindset. And I got a quote, I think it's Richard Robbins that teaches it, in terms of you really figure out how many appointments do you have to do to make what you make, and then really divide that. So I had that number in my head that I knew when I walked out that door and I bombed the CMA or I wasn't getting it, I still told myself, well, you know what? I just made $1,000.
Yep, exactly.
Because all I have to do is to do 10 to get that one. Yep, exactly. And for me, again, being in a market where our properties are very unique, we are not an area that has, a lot of subdivisions where all the townhouses are the same. I really looked at it as an education piece. So when I sit down and I spent 30 to 60 minutes doing an assessment, that was another opportunity for me to get in front of a human being where I could practice my skills. I got to price the house, practice that, and then again, physically be in a house and understand all the ins and outs. So I really looked at it as more of an educational opportunity for me.
That's great. And the reason I asked that question is because for some people, they get hung up on that I'm new, and then there's kind of a tipping point hits where they start doing it enough, they start doing their message enough, and then people stop asking how old you are, stop asking how new you are, stop asking. Yeah. So at what point in your business cycle did that start becoming not the issue for you?
I would say probably Like, it wasn't actually that long ago, I would say, in terms of kind of maybe the last 5 years or so, where I'm now the person that I go in and they know who I am. They don't think that I work for my dad. That being said, I had one last week where I went in and they asked me if I was the daughter of another agent. So it still can always happen, in terms of, I think that's just something you deal with when you're younger within the industry.
Yep.
But absolutely, I would say probably for my first 7 years, I was regularly kind of dealing with the age aspect of it.
Yeah. And for some agents, they don't care and they just go at it. And some people, they let that stop them. And I find I've seen a lot of agents where they get hung up and they focus more on their age and don't just keep going with it. And it's like, if you just keep plowing through and, like you said, figure that number you need and just keep doing it, who cares, whatever the number is, just keep working through it. And then that number will go up.
Yeah, and I think for our industry, in terms of, a lot of it's just about mindset. I remember last year I was kind of helping out a newer agent, and they had done a CMA for someone on their own and they didn't list with them. And this agent was really angry, like just pissed. And, they came back to me and they were complaining, how dare this person not list with me? And they never listed the house. And I turned to them and I said, really point blank, I said, well, why should they? When they have, an ample selection of people to choose from, why you feel almost this entitlement that this person should list their house with you? It's their largest investment.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we forget that in the industry, is that it does take time to build your business. You're not entitled to anything. And always think of it from that other person's perspective, is that if you're sitting there and you're interviewing 3 agents, and one's the top producing agent who's been seasoned around forever, and one's the new kid on the block, you are the underdog for a reason. And, don't take that for granted, that it's going to take time for you to establish your name and your reputation.
And you got to come with your A game and come out swinging, because that's just the reality if you're going to compete against it. And I find that's where agents can really sharpen their skills, by going up against those people and going, okay, what are they doing? What can I do differently? And creating that value proposition and creating that brand for yourself, by comparing yourself, or not comparing, but going, who am I up against and how can I get that slight edge over them?
Yep, absolutely.
So for you, obviously you said when you first started, you were doing postcards around listings. I know now you're doing a little more consistently with your marketing.
Yep.
At what point did you start narrowing down to a specific area and say, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on, and start blitzing that?
Yeah, good question. So I would say probably about 5 years into the business, I started to really kind of narrow in terms of kind of create that micro market and understand in terms of where I was getting a better return. I would say the big change for me in the kind of farming game that I noticed is that I really focused on pivoting my farming to farm the more rural areas of my market. So in terms of, I'm in a community where we have 2 urban towns. So in terms of the communities of Coburg, Port Hope, and of course, being towns, they have more mail. They just get more junk mail. They get more flyers, everything in their mailbox. And what I realized is that when I would farm the rural outskirts area, so like Grafton, Hamilton Township, the community I currently live in, that I would get a much better retention. So I would get a lot more calls on those mail outs. And then I also kind of realized in doing that nobody really focused on being essentially a niche country property agent. Yeah. So I would say that was probably, I know it's a cliche to say game changer, but that was probably the big game changer for me. And is when I realized that was a really untapped market. And I know you've done tons of work around niche marketing. And so in terms of kind of, I think that would be where I really started to really focus and own what I was doing as it related to farming.
And it's a good point, because a lot of people, I find, when they think of farming, they think of just neighborhood specific, or a pocket of an area, or a high density area. And going rural can be an amazing farm, because, like you said, some agents aren't doing that. They're not touching it. They're not going after it. It's out of their area, or sometimes it's just a price point difference and it's not worth it for them. Yeah. So for you, why was it, like, what was it, just that you saw the opportunity there? Or was there a specific reason you shifted from in town to more rural?
I think I saw the opportunity. I really felt it was, as I said, an untapped market. And I think I talk a lot to agents about farming right now, and they always talk about, well, the area that I live in, every agent farms that area. So really try to find the areas that not everybody is farming. I think we get too focused on, what's the sale rate of that specific subdivision, and really going where everybody is. And it's all about competition. So in terms of it was opportunity, but to be completely honest and selfishly, I really enjoy selling rural properties. So in terms of, I have the opportunity now that I sell a lot of really interesting homes, log homes, waterfront, stone houses, farms. And in terms of the way that I look at it, is that it was more of a challenge. So
Yeah.
when I go in and I price rural properties, there's usually no comparables whatsoever, or there's never two like for like properties.
Yeah.
So it was a bit more of a challenge in the sense to be able to go in there and really learn that craft of pricing a property where you don't have the same house that sold, 3 doors down 2 months ago. So it was kind of twofold. It was the fact that it seemed like an untapped market to me, but also the fact that it presented a bit more of a challenge and kind of kept me a little bit more interested in it.
And also, like you said, because no one else was doing it, odds are there aren't that many people who are specializing it. So when you go into price and to do your marketing, you're going to stand out that much more because the average agent may sell one or two in that area and you're selling way more than they are. You've got a lot more skill set. You know what Jane and Joe's place down the road sold for
Yeah.
and Mrs. So-and-so's down the road sold for because you're more engaged with it and you're aware of what's happening in the market.
Yeah, and the thing with that is that it didn't actually take that long. So I would say I now live in a small community outside of Northumberland called Grafton. Around the time that I moved to the rural area is when I really hunkered down on kind of being more country rural property specific.
Yep.
And now I sell the vast majority of rural properties within the community. So it was really only about a 3 to 4 years to go from essentially doing a very small portion of the market to then really doing quite a bit of it.
That's awesome. So I want to delve into what that looked like for you in those few years of what that looked like. Cause I know last time we spoke at Buzz, you talked about how you just blitzed it and blitzed it hard. What did that plan look like for you? And then how did that kind of evolve from making that conscious decision to say, okay, I'm going to focus in the area, and what did it look like at the beginning and how did it kind of roll out?
So in the beginning, again, I really started with the just sold, but obviously when you're trying to really own a certain marketplace in that way, you have to start sending out other material. So I became more focused on selling or sending out market updates, and even really down to everything in terms of my brand. So if you look at my branding photos, in terms of kind of, or you look at my website, any of my marketing, it doesn't take long for you to realize that I'm quote unquote a country rural agent.
Yeah.
So I really felt that it was kind of focused on that. Obviously, I was able to really talk about the homes that I've sold, use that. And then part of it too is that I really made sure I was on my game when it came to all components of understanding country rural property. So living in the country myself, I obviously understand the ins and outs of, wells and septics.
Yep.
I took additional courses on waterfront, understanding conservation authority. Farms was a big one in terms of farms are very unique and every farm is different. So again, really understanding more around the components of selling an agricultural property. So it was kind of a few different areas that you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go after this market and start marketing and, walk into someone's house and not know what you're talking about. So the educational component really has to go along with that as well.
I preach all the time about positioning yourself as the expert and, like you said, learning the extra stuff you need to learn, focusing your marketing in that, changing your branding around that. And by doing that, you position yourself that the public sees you as you're the go-to person. They start trusting you quicker. They start trusting you more because you position yourself instead of just saying, I'm Joe Blow and I sell homes and I can sell it in the area. There's just way more trust with the way you've done it because people start seeing that you are the expert in the area. So for as far as marketing goes, I know you now do postcards, a ton of postcards. Have you found that has been effective? I mean, I know you've done a lot with it. I'll back up. We did an event back in January, or was it February? The Buzz, was it?
Yeah, January, February. Yeah, I was trying to remember.
And it was interesting because there was 3 of us on the panel and you were traditional farming. I think you were the youngest of the 3 of us and you were doing the offline marketing and then Matt was doing all online and I'm kind of in between. Did you find that works because of the demographics or did you find it's just like, why do you think that the offline marketing is just so effective for you?
I think it's consistency in terms of I'm sending out pieces regularly. It is a lot of work in terms of kind of I order all my postcards in. We do all of the shipping essentially out of our house. So in terms of just you have to keep up and keep up on the workload of it. I think the other thing too is that in terms of almost the flip side, that so much of us have gone to online marketing, email campaigns, things to that extent, is that people really don't actually get much physical in-hand mail anymore. So I think that's actually worked to my benefit is that, again, in the rural markets, living in it, you only get a couple pieces of mail in a week. So something in terms of my postcard can really stick out in that way.
I think it's a great point, especially because you said that you're in the rural side of it. Like, as you brought up earlier, most people are focusing on the in-town stuff and they're probably doing their marketing in that and they're looking at the postal walks and focusing on those key things and not sending stuff out. So there's a huge opportunity I'm sure because of that, which has been awesome for you. So can
Yeah.
you share kind of the numbers of how much you're sending, how often you're sending?
Yes, yeah, I actually printed it off from our last
Awesome.
presentation.
Okay.
So in terms of, and again, the interesting thing with farming is that once you really get into a role with it, you don't have to spend as much in terms of to get that same return. And as you and I have talked about in terms of in previous times that we've been together in conferences, is that the only challenge I now have with my numbers is that although it might be the card they call on, there's usually something else that's been added as to why they're going to call. So it's getting a little bit harder, I would say, to say this is purely just a farm. But for 2019, I averaged a farm area of about 7,000 homes. The average price point in my market at that time was $430, and I did about 100,000 pieces within the year. Total cost of the farming was $20,000. I did 28 deals just on farming and earned a commission of about $323,000. Year to date this year, I don't have the full cost of it, but I will say that, especially with COVID, because to be honest, I actually stopped farming during that period of time. My cost is probably going to be maybe 10,000 year to date this year, because I actually did slow it down quite a bit during that period of time. And my year to date earnings is about 420,000 with about 31 sales just on farming.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And again, it's you're not doing anything crazy out there. Like you're not having these, like Matt, when we did our presentation, is building this crazy empire, which is awesome. But for you, it's just simple consistency, consistent messages, which is awesome to see to do that.
Yeah, and to be honest, sometimes I kind of got to laugh on just how easy it is in some ways. Again, it takes time to build that up, but literally we get, and now actually I've enlisted the services of my husband who helps with it. So essentially we get bulk orders of postcards. They go into our basement. He sorts them out, packs them up in a box, and we ship them back out. So in terms of, it is a really basic task in that way, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's not, the overall system is not simple, or it's not crazy, but it's just, you're doing the same thing and you're doing it consistently. Are you doing it monthly, or what's it look like for you?
So again, this year's been pretty sporadic because I did take a pause. So essentially what I did that was a little bit differently or different is that in terms of, like many people, I stopped doing it just I didn't feel that it was appropriate from my own personal perspective in terms of, I didn't want to be insensitive during that hard time in March. So I paused all farming, I want to say March to May, and then I was again strategic with what the first postcard is I sent out. So the first thing I sent out after kind of doing almost a 3-month pause on farming was a postcard that just essentially was very simple message. I was doing Zoom interviews a lot with people in the community at that time. It was what I call a soft sell, or virtually no sell. It just said essentially, a lot of people are concerned about the values of their home right now. Call me for a virtual chat anytime. I'm here to help. And it was just a simple message about that. And I probably got 10 to 15 calls on that just alone. So again, I was strategic with what I put out. And then what I did during that period of time, and again, because we didn't know what would happen this year, it's been an interesting year. I was actually doing probably almost about bi-weekly send outs for a period of time, and then went back to doing monthly.
Okay, that's great. So you're kind of rebuilding the brand again for a short period of time by doing it bi-weekly then.
Yeah. And again, I wasn't sure whether or not we would get to a situation in the fall where I would have to slow things down again for that reason.
Okay. So offline is a big part of it. What are you doing online or at all? Are you doing social media? Are you doing email marketing? Like what kind of things are you doing to complement the postcards and stuff?
Yeah. So I do a lot of social media marketing, so mostly through Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And again, in terms of, I think the big thing with farming is that you have to remember it's not just about sending out a postcard, it's all about consistency. Yeah. So when somebody gets one of my postcards, it's fully branded, very consistent to what my brand is. My website's front and center. 99% of the time before they call me, they're going to go check out what's going on about me online. Yeah. So I want to make sure that that website very much aligns with that branding piece they received, and same with social media. So I do, again, a lot of social media and target marketing, and we do try to align that with the postcards we're sending out as well. So again, it all kind of speaks and plays in together. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say with that, again, pre-COVID, but I did a lot of sponsorship of community events, and again, specifically to where the farm area is.
So how much time would you say you spent involved in community type stuff now? Because I know when you were in Coburg, Port Hope, you're doing a lot of community-based stuff. Are you kind of transitioning that into the area now? as well, or how much of your time is
Yeah,
spent
so
on that?
to be honest, I've taken a really big step back from that. So during the time, and again, people probably don't know, you and I have known each other for a number of years now. So during essentially the first 5 to 7 years I was in real estate, I was very heavily involved in terms of on task force, board of directors. Since I had kids, I've tried to slow that down a bit. So now it's more so around, I try to sponsor as much as I can. So instead of physically sitting on the boards, instead I do the donations and the sponsorships. And again, that's worked well in terms of with the farming and just being more front and center and involved in the community.
Awesome. I know you're big on tracking it. How much can you say came from the sponsorships directly? Because I know some people have a hard time with sponsorships because they say, I put my money out there and I don't know if I got anything. Are you doing anything specific to track that, or have you tracked it at all?
You know what? That's a good question. I don't track it too much, but to be honest, I also use the sponsorship as client appreciation.
Right.
So in terms of what I have traditionally done is that it's kind of twofold. So I sponsor events specifically because then I purchase, or as part of my sponsorship, get tickets that I can then give to clients.
That's great.
And again, I think it's more so, I can say of two specific calls I got this year that was to do with sponsoring organizations these people were involved with. But earlier this year, Family Day, we hosted a family skate in our area, which I know isn't a super inventive idea. But we brought in Elsa and some characters to skate with the kids. And we had about 500 people in attendance at our arena. And to put it in perspective, the population of Grafton, the community I live in, is only about 1,500. Wow. So 1,500, small little hamlet, too small to be a village, and we had 500 people at an event. So again, that's very much in terms of kind of what I try to focus on is getting out there and meeting the needs of the people and supporting the people that are essentially most of my client base and in general the community.
That's awesome. So are you doing a lot of business still back in Cobourg and Port Hope, or are you kind of doubling down and focusing most of your attention in the rural areas?
So still quite a bit, and I actually still do farm certain neighborhoods in Cobourg and Port Hope. And again, in terms of lessons learned, a very valuable lesson I learned in, I want to say 2018, when the market started to slow down here, kind of after all those mortgage changes. What I noticed very quickly is that our upper end rural market, so in terms of kind of more of our luxury lifestyle properties, I call them, took a really big hit. So that market went down by about 60% for the number of sales, which happened to be my market in general. So for me, that was a really good lesson in terms of that I still have to continue to sell in the actual towns themselves, the kind of $500,000 bungalows, things like that. So although I farm a lot rural area, I still actually do a significant, probably about 35% of my sales are still within the towns themselves.
So for people who don't know, your area is outside of the GTA, which is the Greater Toronto Area. You're not a substantial amount, but enough that it's not a commuter town. Are you doing anything specific?
Almost.
It's right on that cusp. Are you doing anything specifically to attract people moving out? Because a lot of people are they're moving out from the city and kind of, especially now, I'm sure after COVID, people are going to be moving out there even more, kind of changing a pace of life. Are you doing anything specific to target those people in your farm to get them to your farm, or are you doing anything around that at all?
No, but to be honest, I'm mostly focused as a listing realtor.
Right.
So I think that would probably be a bit of a difference. I do obtain a lot in terms of referrals from other agents kind of in the GTA Toronto area, more through online social media. So I don't do any sort of kind of printed farming to those communities to attract buyers. To be honest, we have a bit of a different market dynamic. So in our market, although we are not close to the GTA, probably now we're averaging about over 60%, I would say, of our sales are sold by a Toronto realtor. Yeah. So where it used to be that buyers would say, I want to move to Northumberland, they'd call a local agent and look for a home here. What happens most of the time now is that they sell their house in Toronto and then come and look here with the agent that they've worked with. So in terms of, I guess, the way that I kind of work around focusing around that population, because it is a lot of our buyers here, is really just trying to make sure that we have accurate information and lifestyle packaging on all of our listings. But to be honest, I don't focus on, much of the kind of relocation, bringing the buyers in, just because I'm predominantly a listing agent.
Yeah. And it's tough with that many people coming from the city, because I know where I'm in Hamilton, we're getting a lot of agents coming in. It's fine if they want to do that, but we're losing a lot of those buyer leads that we would have gotten in the past that are calling you a sign call. So you kind of have to shift your marketing. If that's if you're heavily focused on generating leads that way, you kind of have to shift up how you get them. So for you, what's the future look like as far as your farm goes? Are you transitioning still, like figuring out what, or have you kind of got your system in place that you're focusing on, or are you adapting as you go?
I think in terms of, to be honest, I haven't seen too much in terms of kind of need to adapt at this point. I'd say I've really kind of gotten into the groove. I know when to send out the postcards, the timing of it. So I think in terms of, again, it's just really being consistent. I would say the one thing that really helped this year is getting some more assistance with it. So in terms of, the joke in my house is that I'd have 50,000 postcards sitting in my basement that I just didn't have the time to send out because I myself was doing it. So as I said, enlisting my husband to now do that has actually helped quite a bit. So he's now the postcard fella in the house.
Yeah, it helps having that accountability and having someone to do it if you're not going to, because I think we talked about it at the beginning of the year about how many people have thrown out postcards because they sit there, they have the intention to get them out. Life happens, it sits in their trunk in their car, and it's like, then they put it off. So yeah, just getting it consistently out there is critical.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
As far as growing the farm, are you trying to gain more market share, or you think you're kind of at the level where you're going to stay at?
Good question. I would say in terms of, I guess we always want to grow, but I'm definitely kind of at the level of where I can be as just an individual agent.
Right.
So I think in terms of if I'm going to continue to grow the business in terms of overall volume of sales, it would definitely be more of having to bring some more people in.
Okay.
I think any of us that are in the real estate industry, you're always kind of looking up and how to grow the business.
That's awesome. So if you were to give someone advice who's looking to do rural farming or just kind of have that shift in their business, what advice would you give to the agents?
Consistency is key. If I were to say one thing in terms of if you put out in terms of a mail drop once or twice a year, you're not going to get anything from it. You have to be really consistent and start small. I think a lot of people, as you and I know, will start with, I got to send out 5,000 postcards. And then because it is a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, they do it once or twice and never do it again. Pick a small neighborhood, but just consistently hit that neighborhood and know that it's going to take time. You're not going to get the return on it for the first year or two. It's going to have to be something that you just keep working on over the years. But, as I think my numbers have shown, and you do it too, that if you stay consistent with it, it's certainly a very fruitful task that you can do in the real estate business to generate leads.
And it's that budget of time and money and not just money, because people think, well, I can afford to do it. But then like you said, the time plays a huge aspect of it. If you can't keep it up to actually keep it running, you better to start small and just do something you can consistently do repeatedly, and you'll see more benefits from that for sure.
Yeah, well, and it's also the time of actually doing the assessments for people and taking the calls. So that's actually one thing I have had to change this year, is that instead of doing, a big drop once a month, I've had to kind of pace it out for the reason that I started to really run into a challenge in which I just couldn't handle any more appointments, which I guess is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So I've had to kind of, actually slow down on the farm rate a little bit, just in terms of kind of to be able to keep up with the demand of calling requests.
It's a good problem to have.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, one of the segments we have is your best book. So what's a great book that you would recommend to our viewers?
So actually, I haven't read any books on farming, and to be honest,
not just about farming, just in general, just life, business, anything that you think would be a good
business in general. Such a cliche. I'm really into Brene Brown, so I've been reading a lot of her books lately. I know that's kind of a cliche to say. I haven't really been reading a lot of kind of more business books as of lately. To be honest, I've really kind of gotten into the podcasts.
Yeah, especially I find since COVID hit, a lot of people are really diving into podcasts because they've got more time and they're changing their life things around, and podcasts are really a big thing right now.
Yep, and audiobooks, I do a lot of that. Again, in terms of being in a rural market, I spend a considerable amount of time just driving around in the car. So I spend a lot of time listening to audiobooks and podcasts. A lot of the ones I've actually listened to as of recently are more around kind of negotiations and people that aren't in real estate. I like to really try to listen to, I think the one on negotiations is actually by a former FBI agent. So trying to kind of listen to things that are outside the typical kind of real estate side of things.
Awesome. And how can our viewers check out what you're working on, and how can they get a hold of you?
So simplest way in terms of kind of, you can add me to Facebook, obviously Jacqueline Pennington. I'm on Instagram quite a bit, so Pennington Remax. And yeah, anyone's always welcome to reach out if they have any questions or need any advice or support along the way. Happy to provide it.
Awesome. We'll put that in the notes below so people can check it out. And thank you for being on the show. It's like you said, we've known each other for a long time, so it's always good to check in and see where you're at and what's happening in your business. So thanks for sharing that information with our audience. I know they're going to get a ton out of this.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for everything you're doing.
Appreciate it. Thanks for checking out today's episode. If you'd like more videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Facebook page and our other social media channels. Looking forward to bringing you more great content like this, and happy farming.